Did you know that the Vikings, a people often portrayed as ruthless raiders, were also masterful explorers who reached North America 500 years before Columbus? The Viking Age, spanning from 793 to 1066 AD, was a period of both violence and exploration, leaving an indelible mark on European history and culture. But the story of the Vikings is much more than just tales of raids and battles. It's the story of a society shaped by harsh landscapes, incredible craftsmanship, and a deep mythology that still fascinates us today. Join us as we uncover the true story of the Viking Age, from their raids on distant lands to their contributions to trade, language, and culture that continue to influence the world today. The Viking Age began in 793 AD with the infamous raid on Lindisfarne, a peaceful monastery off the coast of England, and lasted until 1066 AD, when the Viking influence came to an end at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. But what exactly was the Viking Age? It was a period when Scandinavian seafarers from Norway, Sweden, and Denmark embarked on expeditions across Europe and beyond, sometimes to plunder, sometimes to trade, and sometimes to settle new lands. The Viking Age played a crucial role in shaping European history. Viking raids and conquests challenged kingdoms, but they also opened up new trade routes, introduced new cultural exchanges, and established settlements that would lay the foundation for modern nations. The Vikings hailed from the Scandinavian peninsula, where the rugged landscape and cold climate shaped their way of life. Norway, Sweden, and Denmark are known for their mountain ranges, fjords, and forests, which made farming difficult and forced the Vikings to look outward for resources. Living in such a harsh environment meant the Vikings had to become expert navigators and sailors. Their legendary longships, capable of navigating both rough seas and shallow rivers, were key to their success in raiding and exploring distant lands. It turns out that when life gives you cold winters and rocky soil, you build a boat and go looking for treasure. Viking society was organized into clans, each led by a chieftain who wielded both military and political power. Warriors held high status in Viking society, and honor in battle was seen as a way to achieve eternal glory in Valhalla, the hall of fallen warriors in Viking mythology. But the Vikings were not just raiders. They were also skilled farmers, craftsmen, and traders. Agriculture and trade were vital to Viking life, with trade networks stretching from Scandinavia to Constantinople. Viking craftsmanship, especially in metalwork and woodwork, produced intricate jewelry, weapons, and household items that were highly prized. The Viking Age began with one of the most famous events in European history, the raid on Lindisfarne in 793 AD. This attack on a peaceful monastery off the coast of England shocked the Christian world and marked the beginning of a centuries-long era of Viking raids across Europe. But what motivated the Vikings to launch these violent expeditions? The answer lies in the Vikings' need for wealth, resources, and land. Life in Scandinavia was difficult due to its harsh climate and limited farmland. As a result, Vikings looked beyond their homeland, seeking out new opportunities in foreign lands. Monasteries like Lindisfarne were ideal targets, rich in gold, silver, and other treasures, but poorly defended. However, the Vikings weren't just raiders. They were also explorers and traders. Their famous longships were technological marvels, allowing them to travel vast distances across both open seas and shallow rivers. This gave the Vikings unparalleled mobility, enabling them to reach distant lands such as the British Isles, France, and even as far as Italy and the Mediterranean. Driven by their thirst for adventure and resources, the Vikings also established settlements in places like Iceland, Greenland, and even Vinland, the name they gave to their short-lived colony in North America. These voyages of exploration made the Vikings some of the first Europeans to set foot in the New World, centuries before Columbus. As the Vikings expanded their reach, they also created vast trade networks connecting Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. These trade routes allowed them to exchange furs, amber, silver, and even slaves for exotic goods like silk, spices, and wine, cementing the Vikings' role as both raiders and sophisticated merchants. Though they are often remembered for their raids, The Vikings' true legacy lies in their ability to explore, settle, and trade across vast distances, helping to shape the political and cultural landscapes of medieval Europe and beyond. While the Vikings are often remembered for their raids, their ability to settle and expand across vast territories was equally significant. Starting in the late 9th century, the Vikings began establishing permanent settlements throughout the regions they had previously raided. These settlements were not just temporary camps, but thriving communities that would shape the history of the British Isles, Iceland, Greenland, and even North America. In the British Isles, Viking settlers formed key strongholds, particularly in England, Scotland, and Ireland. Dublin, for example, was originally founded as a Viking settlement in 841 AD and quickly became an important trading hub. Vikings in these areas did more than just raid. They engaged in farming, trade, and intermarriage with local populations, which led to the blending of cultures. This fusion of Norse and native traditions had a lasting impact on local languages, place names, and social structures. Further afield, the Vikings made bold moves to colonize Iceland in the late 9th century, where they found rich farmland and established long-lasting communities. Iceland became a center of Norse culture, where sagas and mythology were preserved and passed down through generations. Viking settlers also ventured even farther west to Greenland, led by Eric the Red, who founded settlements on this harsh but fertile island in the 10th century. Perhaps most famously, around the year 1000 AD, Vikings reached the shores of North America, which they called Vinland. Led by Leif Erikson, these explorers landed in what is today Newfoundland, Canada, making them the first Europeans to set foot in the Americas, centuries before Columbus. Although their settlements in Vinland were short-lived due to conflicts with local indigenous peoples and the harsh environment, the Viking discovery of North America remains one of their most extraordinary achievements. Beyond the lands they settled, the Vikings also established vast trade networks. Viking merchants set up trading posts along rivers and coastal areas, connecting Scandinavia with the Mediterranean, the Middle East, and Asia. These trade routes helped spread goods like furs, amber, and silver, as well as cultural ideas and technologies. Through their expansion and settlement, the Vikings left a lasting legacy. They influenced the political, social, and economic landscapes of the regions they settled, while also expanding Europe's geographical understanding of the world. From Dublin to Iceland and Vinland, Viking settlements created a ripple effect that continues to shape history. If you've made it this far, why not give that like button a little love and subscribe for a dose of inspiration? Your support keeps our adventure going. Now, let's dive back in. At the heart of Viking culture was their belief in the Norse gods, powerful deities like Odin, the wise Allfather, Thor, the thunder-wielding protector, and Freya, the goddess of love and fertility. Viking mythology wasn't just about gods. It explained the cosmic order, the cycle of life and death, and the values of bravery, loyalty, and honor. Mythology also played a role in guiding the Vikings in life and death. Warriors believed that dying in battle would bring them to Valhalla, while others would go to Hel, the land of the dead. Over time, as the Vikings expanded into Christian territories, they began to convert to Christianity, leading to a gradual shift away from their pagan beliefs. The Vikings were highly skilled artisans. Their art, often inspired by their myths, featured intricate designs in metalwork, wood carving, and textiles. Viking brooches, arm rings, and weapons were adorned with symbols of gods, animals, and nature. The Vikings also developed the runes, an ancient alphabet used for inscriptions on stone, wood, and metal. These runes served both practical and magical purposes, often telling the stories of Viking ancestors and heroes. The Vikings were not only warriors and explorers, but also a people who loved to celebrate. Their festivals were deeply rooted in Norse mythology and the cycles of nature, marking significant moments like seasonal changes, harvests, and religious rituals. One of the most important Viking festivals was Yule, which celebrated the winter solstice, the longest night of the year. During Yule, the Vikings honored Odin, the Allfather, and other gods, lighting bonfires and holding feasts to encourage the return of the sun and the end of the long winter. Another key festival was Blot, a sacrificial feast held to appease the gods and ensure fertility and good harvests. During Blot, Vikings would offer up animals, or in earlier times, sometimes human sacrifices, to deities like Freya, the goddess of fertility, and Thor, the god of thunder. These rituals were often accompanied by feasting, drinking, music, and storytelling, with the goal of strengthening the bond between the gods and their people. Seasonal festivals also included all-thing gatherings, where communities would come together for legal matters, trade, and communal celebrations. These events brought Viking clans together, solidifying alliances, resolving disputes, and of course, hosting grand feasts to mark important decisions. For the Vikings, any chance to eat, drink, and tell epic stories seemed like a great way to honor their gods and strengthen community ties. When it comes to Viking food, survival was key in the harsh Scandinavian climate. The Viking diet was largely based on what they could grow, hunt, or gather, and despite their reputation as fierce raiders, they were also skilled farmers and fishermen. Their food culture revolved around simple but hearty meals made from meat, fish, grains, and dairy. One of the most common dishes was stew, made from whatever meat was available, typically pork, beef, or lamb, and flavored with herbs and vegetables like cabbage, leeks, and onions. The Vikings also enjoyed fish, particularly herring and salmon, which they would smoke, salt, or dry for preservation during the long winters. Grains like barley, rye, and oats were essential to Viking diets. They used these to make bread and porridge, often sweetened with honey or berries. Dairy products, including butter, cheese, and milk, were also staples in Viking households, thanks to their livestock. And let's not forget their love of mead, a honey-based alcoholic drink that was enjoyed at feasts and celebrations. For the Vikings, mead wasn't just a drink, it was thought to connect them to the gods, especially in the great feasts of Valhalla. While Viking meals were practical and centered around survival, food was also a way to bring people together. Feasts were held during festivals, after successful raids, or to mark important community events. These gatherings were an opportunity to share the bounty of the land, tell stories of the gods, and strengthen the bonds of Viking society. The Vikings spoke Old Norse, a language that would heavily influence the languages of Europe. Many words in English, Scottish, and Icelandic can be traced back to the Vikings. Sky, egg, knife, and window are just a few examples of Viking influence on modern language. In Viking society, both men and women had important roles. Men were often warriors, farmers, and craftsmen, while women managed households, land, and had the right to own property. Viking women were known for their strength and independence, and some, like Lagertha and Freydis Eiríksdóttir, are remembered as legendary warriors and explorers. Trade was a cornerstone of the Viking economy. Viking merchants exchanged furs, amber, silver, and even slaves across Europe, the Middle East, and as far as Asia. These trade routes enriched Viking society and helped establish connections between distant lands. By the late 11th century, the once dominant Viking Age began to come to an end. Several key factors contributed to the decline of Viking influence across Europe, signaling the closing chapter of their reign as seafaring warriors, traders, and settlers. One of the main factors leading to the decline of the Viking Age was the rise of centralized kingdoms in Europe. In the early days of Viking raids, much of Europe was fragmented into small, often isolated kingdoms or principalities that were easy targets for swift and sudden Viking raids. However, by the late 10th and 11th centuries, stronger and more unified kingdoms began to emerge, particularly in England, France, and Scandinavia itself. These newly centralized states, with more organized armies and stronger fortifications, were better equipped to defend themselves against Viking attacks. For example, King Alfred the Great of Wessex successfully resisted Viking invasions in England by building a network of burhs, fortified towns, and forming a professional army. This growing resistance made it increasingly difficult for the Vikings to continue their traditional raids. Another major factor was the spread of Christianity throughout Scandinavia and Europe. As Christian missionaries converted Viking leaders and their communities, pagan Viking customs such as raiding and sacrificial rituals began to lose their influence. King Harald Bluetooth of Denmark and King Olaf Tryggvason of Norway were among the first Viking rulers to adopt Christianity, leading their people to embrace the new religion. Christianity also brought a cultural shift. The Viking gods, Odin, Thor, and Freya, were gradually replaced by the teachings of Christ. Many of the traditional reasons for Viking raids, such as gaining honor through battle or offering spoils to the gods, were no longer as important. With Christian values and ethics influencing Viking societies, the era of violent raids began to fade. As the Viking Age progressed, internal conflicts and civil wars within the Scandinavian kingdoms weakened their power and unity. The consolidation of power in Denmark, Norway, and Sweden led to rivalries among Viking chieftains and royal families, causing political instability. These internal conflicts drained resources and attention that had previously been directed outward. In places like Norway, ongoing struggles for the throne led to periods of chaos, distracting the Viking leaders from expansion efforts and focusing their energies on maintaining control within their own territories. This decline in unity among the Vikings made it harder for them to launch coordinated and successful raids. Over time, as Vikings began to settle in the regions they had previously raided, particularly in England, Ireland, and France, many Viking communities became integrated into local societies. The Normans in northern France, descendants of Viking settlers, famously adopted the local language and customs while maintaining some elements of their Norse heritage. As Viking leaders became feudal lords and local rulers, they relied more on trade and diplomacy than on raiding. Trade networks established by the Vikings across Europe, the Middle East, and Asia became increasingly vital to their economy, and many Viking warriors transitioned from being raiders to being merchants. This shift from raiding to settling and trading diminished the need for the aggressive expeditions that had defined the earlier part of the Viking Age. One of the most symbolic events marking the end of the Viking Age was the Battle of Stamford Bridge in 1066 AD. Harald Hardrada, the King of Norway, led a final major Viking invasion of England in an attempt to seize the throne. However, the Viking forces were decisively defeated by the English king Harold Godwinson, marking the end of the last great Viking attempt to conquer England. This defeat signaled the decline of the Viking influence in Britain and the wider world. Shortly after this battle, another significant event took place: the Norman conquest of England by William the Conqueror, himself a descendant of Viking settlers in France. The Norman victory at the Battle of Hastings further integrated the Viking legacy into European history, but it also marked the closing of a distinct chapter. The Viking Age had come to an end. By the close of the 11th century, the combination of stronger kingdoms, the spread of Christianity, internal conflicts, and the transition to trade and settlement had effectively brought the Viking Age to a halt. While their influence lingered in the form of settlements, trade routes, and cultural legacies, the age of Viking raids and conquests had drawn to a close, but their impact on Europe would last for centuries. Though their time has passed, the Vikings left a lasting legacy. Their exploration, trade, and cultural exchange helped shape the medieval world, and their influence is still felt today in language, law, and place names across Europe. From their fearsome longships to their intricate art, the Viking spirit continues to capture the imagination of people around the world. The Viking Age was a remarkable period of exploration, innovation, and cultural transformation. The Vikings were not merely raiders. They were traders, settlers, artisans, and explorers who significantly shaped the course of history. Their legacy is still evident today, serving as a reminder that this captivating era continues to inspire us. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the Viking Age. If you enjoyed delving into Viking history and culture, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. And if you're eager to learn more, we also have videos exploring the rich histories and cultures of Denmark, Sweden, and Norway. So don't miss out. We'd love to hear your thoughts or experiences with Viking history. Share them in the comments below. Stay tuned with InspirEclipses for more fascinating stories from history and beyond.